Chapter 1 Medical BA. Jake Morrison slowly blinked his eyes open to a dimly lit room filled with the sterile smell of antiseptic and the low hum of medical equipment. The white walls were lined with monitors that beat softly in rhythm, casting an eerie glow over everything. He was lying on what felt like a thick padded hospital bed, bandages wrapped around various parts of his body where he'd been injured during a rescue mission. Jake groaned as the sharp pain from his injuries pulsed through him with every breath. His movements were sluggish and slow, but somehow there was something comforting in knowing that after everything, falling debris, burning buildings had survived. He looked around and saw no familiar faces, no coworkers, just a strange nurse hovering over his bed. How am I here?" Jake rasped out through the pain, his voice dry from lack of use or water recently. A soft click sounded as a screen on one of the machines blinked to life with a new reading. The blue-skinned figure beside him turned and met his gaze. She wore a uniform that looked like a cross between something medical techs would wear back home and a sleek, modern design, tight-fitting but loose enough for movement, and clearly made from some high-tech material, though judging by the soft rustle when she moved. Nurse Thaley Vexner, the nurse said in a clear voice. Her blue skin was patterned with intricate silver lines that seemed to shift as if they were part of an elaborate holographic design, but were actually just her natural markings. Jake guessed. "And you are firefighter Jake Morrison. Nice to meet, or rather nice to wake up and see," he replied, managing a smile despite the pain. She checked his vitals with precise efficiency: temperature, heart rate, blood pressure. Her movements were quick, but never rushed, as if she had rehearsed each step countless times before performing them on him now. "Your injuries are severe, Nurse Thaley," he began hesitantly, her violet eyes looking down at the screen showing Jake's stats. "And yet here I am," he said with a hint of pride and humor in his voice. He was proud to be alive, and that these folks had managed to keep him stable enough for now. "I should inform Dr. Vexar about your status," she murmured, picking up her datapad from the side table where it lay among scattered medical supplies. She tapped at a screen with slender fingers adorned by simple rings, each one containing what looked like glowing crystals that pulsed softly in sync with her movements. Jake watched as Nurse Thaley froze mid-tap when he spoke again, his voice casual and friendly despite the circumstances. "You're doing great," Jake said without thinking. "You know, you've got this." Her fingers paused over the screen once more before she finally let out a breath that was nearly silent, but seemed to shake her shoulders slightly. She turned back towards him with an expression that flickered between confusion and disbelief. "What did you just say, Nurse Thaley?" he asked, her voice barely above a whisper despite their close proximity in this quiet room. Jake felt his cheeks heat up as he realized what had slipped out of his mouth, a term so casual it could be dismissed easily back home, but might mean something entirely different here. He started to backtrack immediately, realizing the severity of such a slip-up. "Sorry, I didn't. You called me baby, Nurse Thaley," he said abruptly, her eyes wide and fixed on his face, as if searching for some hidden meaning or context. Jake's mouth dropped open in shock at how quickly she had picked up what he likely would have dismissed as a casual compliment elsewhere. Did I? Oh geez. Sorry there was no malice behind it," Jake continued nervously. I just meant you've been great helping me feel better." "But Nurse Thaley," he stepped back from him sharply, dropping the datapad with an audible clatter on the floor as she did so. It skidded across cold linoleum before coming to a rest near his feet. She began again, but then shook her head firmly, turning away and walking briskly out of Jake's sight towards what must have been some emergency exit or staff only the entrance, since it blended into the wall seamlessly. as she passed through without delay. Jake stared after her in bafflement for several moments. He hadn't expected such a reaction, especially not given that calling someone baby was common enough back home, where he came from, certainly far less formal than romantic declarations should be considered. Confused and slightly alarmed at the nurse's behavior, Jake tried to make sense of what had just transpired. "Hey," he called out after her retreating figure. "Wait a minute." Other nurses peeked their heads into his room cautiously from behind closed doors or through partially open medbay doors nearby, the kind that could swing open silently with a push. They exchanged knowing glances and stifled giggles, whispering amongst themselves as if sharing some inside joke. Jake's heart pounded in confusion and embarrassment. He didn't know what had just gone wrong, but clearly everyone around him thought there was something significant enough to warrant laughter behind his back. "Is someone going to tell me exactly why all of this is a big deal?" Jake shouted towards the exit where Nurse Thalie had fled, hoping she might hear, or better yet, one of these other nurses who seemed in on whatever joke he apparently wasn't part of would clue him into what was happening before it spiraled completely out of control. Suddenly, as if by magic or some kind of cue, all conversations stopped abruptly, and the nurse closest to his room straightened up from her hunched position near another patient's bed. She approached Jake with a serious look on her face, but there was an undercurrent of amusement that made it clear she knew something he didn't. "Mr. Morrison," she said carefully, addressing him formally despite how casual they normally were in Earth hospitals, "there seems to be some kind of cultural misunderstanding here." "You'll say," Jake agreed, frustration evident. He propped himself up on his elbows, though the movement caused a sharp pain that made him wince and pull back immediately. "It appears your statement was more meaningful than you intended," she continued softly, but with an uncharacteristic formality. "From what I understand from Nurse Thalia's reactions, it sounds like in her culture calling someone baby is considered quite significant." "Like a proposal or something?" Jake asked skeptically, still not grasping why this would be such a big deal. The nurse nodded solemnly. "Something along those lines, yes," she confirmed with visible reluctance, given the gravity of the situation now evident to everyone around them. She looked back towards where Nurse Thalie had left, and then returned her gaze toward Jake again, almost apologetically, before continuing in an urgent tone, "Nurse Thalie, I took your words very seriously." Jake felt his jaw drop open as realization dawned. If baby was akin to proposing marriage here, no wonder she'd run off. He thought back over what had transpired between him and Nurse Thalie. Her reaction when he casually mentioned it. "I don't think I quite understood," Jake said slowly, trying desperately not to panic about the implications of his mistake. The nurse sighed heavily. "In Vexari culture, your term was akin to offering a formal courtship declaration." Jake's mind raced as the gravity of what had happened became clear. Had he just proposed, without even realizing it? "Wait, so this isn't like Earth?" Jake asked cautiously, hoping against hope that maybe there could be some kind of miscommunication here. "No," she said firmly yet gently, now knowing how significant this was for both parties involved, and perhaps especially given the potential consequences to an injured man in recovery mode. "It seems you inadvertently proposed." Jake blinked rapidly several times, trying desperately to grasp all this information as it bombarded him from multiple sources around him. He had no idea if Nurse Thalie would return, or what her reaction might be, but for now there was only time to process everything that just happened and figure out how he could possibly fix his mistake. As the nurse finished explaining, Jake's heart raced faster than ever before as reality hit home about both their cultures. vast differences. He hadn't expected such an outcome from a casual comment, and yet here they were. Confusion melded with growing awareness of possible repercussions, swirling around him in this sterile medical bay environment, while others buzzed like bees to some unseen nectar. He had indeed just called Nurse Thalie a baby, and on their planet that could mean far more than he ever imagined, especially given her shocked reaction moments ago. How was he going to face whatever came next? And what did any of this really even mean for both them now? His mind reeled as nurses began moving about the room once again, carrying out other patients and preparing beds nearby, almost like nothing had happened, while his thoughts spiraled towards trying to understand and rectify such a monumental gaffe. The silence from where Nurse Thalie had fled was deafening yet telling. Jake knew he needed answers before more misunderstandings occurred. His next move would be crucial in navigating this intergalactic cultural minefield. But first, perhaps understanding exactly what baby truly meant here on their world might just give him a fighting chance at redemption. As the final pieces fell into place within his mind regarding Nurse Thalie's culture and how drastically different it was compared to his own casual terminology used back home, realization dawned clear as day. He had proposed marriage without even knowing what had said meant on her planet. He just hoped there would still be time to correct this massive mix-up before everything spiraled out of control. Andy Jake groaned softly as he slowly pushed himself up from his hospital bed, wincing at the pain that shot through his injured muscles and bones, but determined to face whatever lay ahead. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of medical monitors and nearby bedside echoes of the emergency that had landed him here. He swung his legs over the edge, setting his feet on the cold linoleum floor with a grimace. He needed to find Nurse Thalie. But where could she have gone? His mind raced as he thought back through everything that happened after their last conversation: medical scans, treatments, and then nothing. It was only later, when others mentioned seeing her leaving hastily, that it began sinking in. She must be somewhere around here. He couldn't let this stand between them. She deserved more than a blunder from some confused human. He swung his legs back into the bed, reaching for clothes to change out of his hospital gown before he could leave. But as he started pulling on jeans and shirt borrowed from someone nearby, the hospital's usual visitor attire, footsteps in the corridor outside caught his attention. He froze mid-dress, straining to hear more. Sure enough, a few moments later, Nurse Thalie entered the room, her violet eyes sweeping across him with something unreadable lingering there before settling on her feet and quickly moving past towards an exit door at the far end of the hallway. A pang in his chest made it clear he needed to act fast if anything was going to change. "Hey!" Jake called out, voice a mix of urgency and concern, as she stopped short by the door frame. She turned slowly, hesitating before giving him her full attention, though clearly uneasy about facing him again so soon. "Yes." Jake stepped closer towards her, ignoring his injuries for now, because this felt more important than just dealing with them. Thighs was something he needed to fix personally first and foremost. "I'm sorry," he began earnestly, knowing it wouldn't be enough but having no idea where else to start. "But I didn't mean to. You know." He paused awkwardly, searching for words that would convey the truth of his intentions while being mindful not to make things worse. Her voice was small when she replied, "You did not mean what you said?" It hit him. Thench wasn't sure he meant it. Disappointment and hurt lingered in her expression as well. There were no misunderstandings here, only miscommunications that could lead down paths neither of them had expected nor wanted. "No," Jake answered honestly, after a beat. "No, I didn't mean it like that at first." He took another cautious step toward her, hands raised slightly to show he wasn't threatening or rushing things further into chaos. But now, seeing how you reacted and everything, his words trailed off as his mind grappled with the enormity of what calling someone baby meant in this place. Her eyes locked onto him intensely then, searching for something he couldn't yet define. Could she sense his sudden shift toward sincerity, even through their cultural divide? I don't not mean it. Jake tried again carefully. You're nice and pretty. He paused to take a breath and look her in the eye, honestly. And I literally just met you, Nurse Thalie. He blinked, lips parting slightly as she considered his words, before looking away momentarily deep in thought then back at him. She sighed softly. Vexari courtships begin with such declarations, she explained gently, but firmly now that he seemed more willing to understand. Then we learn each other. It hit Jake like a wave crashing. The idea of dating someone from another planet just clicked into place as part of their cultural norms here, which made sense given her reaction earlier and the way it aligned with his own interest in getting to know her better. Like dating? He queried hesitantly now that she had clarified what was at stake culturally for both them, wondering if there really could be common ground even amidst such stark differences. Yes, Nurse Thalie. He nodded slowly. If that is your word. Jake felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. There might actually still be room to navigate through this mix-up without shattering whatever connection had sparked between them despite the misunderstandings. Then can I ask you out for lunch? Jake asked, voice more confident now as he reached into his pocket, pulling out an index card with a restaurant's name scribbled on it that someone must have given him earlier. Properly this time, the moment stretched between them like a thread connecting hearts across worlds and cultures before Nurse Thalie. His lips broke into one of the brightest smiles Jake had ever seen, a warmth lighting up her entire face from within. All right, she agreed softly, reaching out to take the card with trembling fingers that betrayed more excitement than he could have hoped for amidst all this potential complication. Lunch sounds lovely. Relief washed over him and Waves was agreeing. He couldn't help but grin back at her as genuine happiness shone through his own exhaustion and confusion. Great, Jake nodded, feeling a lightness settle into the pit of his stomach that hadn't been there before their discussion. I'll come get you when it's time. She gave him another one of those heart-stopping smiles that made it hard to look away or breathe properly. Yes, she replied simply, but with an enthusiasm he could hear in her voice despite its quiet tone. With a final encouraging nod from her direction, Nurse Thalie turned and left through the same exit door without another word, her steps quick yet unhurried, as if she were savoring this unexpected turn of events internally, even more than showing it externally. Jake stood there watching until she was out of sight before turning back to finish getting ready himself. The cafeteria seemed an odd place for such a momentous decision given the sterile corridors he just traversed, but somehow its buzz and warmth felt right for continuing their conversation properly this time rather than under the pressure of miscommunication or rushed explanations. And so Jake set off down that familiar hallway towards his next step in unraveling whatever strange fate had tied him to Nurse Thalie, a journey he hoped would lead them closer together despite all odds. Jake sat up from his hospital bed and stretched cautiously, as if waking to a new day that might bring more questions than answers. The sterile scent of antiseptic and faint hum of medical equipment filled the room he was in, which made him acutely aware of Nurse Thalie's absence for the first time since she had entered his life, or rather, he into hers. Good morning, Dr. Voss, a station counselor who specialized in cross-species mediation, greeted him warmly as she stepped inside, Carrie in what looked like a small dossier. "Jake Morrison?" He nodded and offered her a tired yet amused smile that was probably more for himself than the doctor. It had been less than an hour since he'd woken up to find Thalie standing over his hospital bed in full nurse attire, declaring him as hers, without any context of what such words might mean on another planet. "Thank you for taking time out," Jake said, leaning back against the pillows behind him and adjusting himself into a more comfortable position. "I think I'm ready for some clarification now." Doctor Voss placed her dossier down onto a nearby table with a light thud before joining Jake by his bedside. She was an older woman with sharp eyes that scanned over both his physical state and mental demeanor, gauging where to start. "Let's break it down, Doctor," Voss began, pulling out several sheets of paper from her folder and laying them out neatly in front of Jake, as if preparing for a meeting rather than discussing matters between species. "From what I understand, you two have been through quite the whirlwind scenario." Jake nodded again, this time with an almost sarcastic grin playing at his lips. "Whirlwind is putting it mildly," he admitted. Dr. Voss looked up from her notes and offered a small chuckle that seemed to calm him despite its humor being lost on Jake's current state of mind, trying to reconcile one flippant remark with the serious cultural implications behind Nurse Thalie, his declaration. "Indeed, but let's focus on what matters most here," she said as professionally as ever. She leaned forward slightly, her tone becoming more personal and less clinical. Her eyes met his squarely now that he had settled down somewhat himself. "The term you use with Nurse Thalie Bibi in Vexari culture isn't just affectionate slang but a profound declaration of intent," she explained carefully, as if treading through the nuances between her own species' vernacular and those unfamiliar. Jake's mouth went dry, mind racing back to that moment when his words had slipped out without thought. It felt like an eternity ago despite it happening mere hours before. "Right," he said quietly, feeling a knot form in his stomach as realization dawned on him fully for the first time. The idea of proposing marriage with just 3 letters was staggering. Her reaction? Dr. Voss prompted gently but firmly to guide Jake toward understanding rather than avoiding uncomfortable truths about this unusual situation. Jake swallowed hard before answering truthfully. She seemed surprised and a bit overwhelmed by it all. Dr. Voss nodded, her expression softening into one of empathy as she reached out with the hand, not holding papers, to give his shoulder a reassuring pat. This small gesture had more impact than any words could convey. Understanding was beginning to form between them. "Indeed, Doctor," Voss agreed softly. "For Nurse Thalie, this declaration marks the very start of courtship rather than marriage itself." Jake blinked rapidly as comprehension began to seep through his mental fog like water through a cracked dam. The idea that what he thought might have been a terrible misstep could actually signify something beautiful and new was both daunting and exhilarating. "So we're dating?" Jake asked hesitantly now, seeking clarity after so much confusion. Dr. Voss gave him another gentle nod. "Essentially," she confirmed calmly yet with the same air of hope that had shone through Nurse Thalie, his eyes when discussing this matter. "The courtship period is meant to allow both individuals time to learn and grow together." Jake felt a flicker of genuine excitement ignite within his chest, a sense of anticipation for what could unfold despite all the uncertainty. If dating was part of their cultural protocol, it offered them space to explore common ground in ways he hadn't previously considered possible. He looked over at Dr. Voss with renewed curiosity and gratitude. "And if we're not compatible?" Jake asked cautiously, but sincerely, wanting to understand fully before forging ahead blindly into uncharted territory. "Then you both can part honorably," she replied evenly, her voice carry in a reassuring tone that settled his nerves considerably. "This isn't about rushing or forcing anything. It's about exploring mutual interests." The knot in Jake's stomach began to unravel slightly. At this perspective, there was still room for them to figure things out together without pressure. He let out an almost imperceptible sigh of relief as Dr. Voss continued speaking, explaining finer points and laying down ground rules regarding communication and respect between species during the courtship phase. Jake found himself nodding more frequently now that clarity began filtering through his confusion earlier on about their unusual situation. "All right," he agreed finally, with a newfound sense of determination shining in his eyes, determined to give this chance at something new its fair shot despite all odds. "I think I'm ready for lunch." The counselor glanced up from her notes then, giving him another encouraging smile, as if reading Jake's mind exactly about what kind of next step he would take. "Then can I ask you out for lunch?" Jake asked Nurse Thaley, holding an index card with a restaurant name scribbled on it given to him earlier by someone who must have sensed his predicament properly this time. Nurse Thaley looked at the card in her hands as if she were studying its contents closely, yet also carefully gauging Jake's intentions behind such an offer. "All right," she agreed softly, reaching out with trembling fingers that betrayed more excitement than he could have hoped for amidst all this potential complication. "Lunch sounds lovely." Relief and happiness washed over him in waves as their agreement solidified. There might actually still be common ground despite initial misunderstandings and cultural barriers separating them now. "Great," Jake nodded, feeling a lightness settle into the pit of his stomach that hadn't been there before their discussion. "He'll come get you when it's time." "Yes," she replied simply, but with an enthusiasm he could hear in her voice despite its quiet tone. As Nurse Thaley turned to leave without another word, her steps quick yet unhurried, as if savoring this unexpected turn of events internally, even more than showing it externally, watched until she was out of sight before turning back to finish getting ready himself for what promised to be an important step in unraveling whatever strange fate had tied him to her. The cafeteria seemed oddly fitting despite its sterile corridors and buzz that contrasted sharply with the quiet, intimate nature of their conversation earlier. Yet somehow it felt right, in neutral ground where two very different worlds could collide safely under mutual understanding rather than shock or miscommunication. And so Jake set off down those familiar hallways towards his next step in unraveling whatever strange fate had tied him to Nurse Thalia, hoping that this journey would lead them closer together despite all odds. Indeed, Jake stood outside Thalia's hospital room, his heart pounding slightly as he adjusted the crumpled restaurant card in his hand for what felt like the 100th time that morning. He had rehearsed this moment a dozen times since they agreed to meet for lunch, but now it seemed almost too simply an index card with a name scribbled on it and an invitation from one hospital bed to another. "Ready?" he called through the door, his voice carrying just enough warmth so as not to alarm her overly cautious nature. The sound of footsteps shuffling inside gave him a brief moment to collect himself before she opened the door. Thalia stepped out slowly, the blue hue of her skin contrasting sharply against the white hospital walls behind her. Her violet eyes met his expectantly and with an underlying current of curiosity that made Jake feel both nervous and exhilarated. "Shall we?" he asked gently, holding a hand out to offer support if she needed either simply companionship, since they were now taking this leap together. She nodded slightly, placing one small step in front of the other until she was standing next to him. He could almost feel her eyes studying his face as much as his movements for any sign that he wasn't still bewildered by their unusual situation, a concern that had been clear from the moment they'd met. "Do you need help walking?" Jake asked, feeling genuinely concerned now rather than merely being polite. The last thing he wanted was to inadvertently embarrass her or make this uncomfortable on such an important day. She smiled softly at him and shook her head gently, but then paused, as if reconsidering before nodding again more firmly. "I would like that," she said quietly yet with clear determination in both voice and gesture, as their hands met mid-air, fingers intertwining for support rather than affection. "Just no," but it felt far from awkward. They walked together through the familiar corridors of the hospital, passing doors marked with names he recognized, but mostly avoiding eye contact or conversation until they reached a small elevator. Inside, Thalie pressed an unfamiliar button and watched as numbers scrolled upwards in rapid succession that made Jake's head spin momentarily before settling into place on their destination floor. "Is this where we exit?" he asked cautiously once the doors opened again to reveal another hallway line with windows offering glimpses of nature outside, a stark contrast after walking through sterile hallways for so long today. The light filtering through was warm and inviting, giving Jake a sense of relief despite his nervousness about being seen together. "Yes, Thalie," replied softly as she stepped out into the sunlight streaming across pale tiles beneath their feet. "It leads to Station Park." Jake followed her gaze and saw an open space stretching ahead with lush greenery and artificial water features, creating a serene oasis among towering buildings that still surrounded them on all sides. The place was empty of people at this time, allowing for privacy amid the vastness. "This is beautiful," Jake said softly, his voice reflecting genuine appreciation mixed with awe as they stepped out onto grass beneath their feet and comfortably warm from recent sunshine despite the cool morning air blowing slightly in through trees lining the perimeter. The scent of earth and blooming flowers filled the air, along with distant murmurs that suggested others were already there, though not yet visible to them. Thalie nodded slowly, as if agreeing silently, but didn't comment further until they found a spot near an artificial pond where tall grass waved gently underfoot like soft green waves. She turned slightly towards him then and smiled softly before sitting down carefully, her movements graceful despite any lingering stiffness from long hours of standing in medical quarters. "Would you join me?" she asked, the invitation clear, though formal again, as if wanting to ensure no missteps had happened since they left behind those sterile walls for this more natural setting. Yet Jake could see something else there, too, something that made his heart flutter even further under her violet gaze now fixed on him expectantly. "Of course," he replied with a smile, and took the offered hand again, letting himself be pulled down beside her onto the cool grass where they sat facing each other, but not quite touching yet, as if still finding their way in this shared space of comfort and curiosity. He could see how carefully she was observing his reaction, seeking signs that made sense to him too after everything that had transpired. They talked first about small things. He asked her what kind of plants grew on Vexari soil, while Thalie listened intently, then described with gentle ease the colors, textures, and even scents of flowers back home in ways that painted vivid images for Jake despite his lack of direct experience. From their conversation naturally flowed into more personal topics as they both felt their barriers slowly melting away under this shared openness. Jake explained about his work at Station Fire Department, how he came to love rescuing people from danger and helping them recover afterwards. The rush of adrenaline that coursed through him whenever flames threatened human life, along with the satisfaction in knowing one had made a difference. They listened carefully, nodding occasionally, but mostly just absorbing all details, as if trying hard to understand what motivated such dedication despite cultural differences. Then it was her turn to talk about nursing on Vexari ships and station. She learned early that patients needed more than medical care, sometimes how important kindness could be in moments of crisis or fear, because healing wasn't only physical, but emotional too. The way she spoke made Jake feel a kinship he hadn't expected with someone so different from him, bridging gaps through shared experiences rather than just words. But it was when they started discussing families and dreams that things began to shift subtly between them. Jake talking openly about his hope for someday having children, and how those values shaped who he hoped to become, while Thalia revealed her own longing for a future where traditions met new opportunities without losing essence of cultural identity. The way she spoke made him realize just how much they could connect despite coming from different worlds, each bringing unique strengths that complemented rather than clashed. Jake found himself asking why humans use terms like baby so casually, even to strangers sometimes, and Thalia's response was both intriguing and touching. In human culture, he explained softly, after a thoughtful pause, it shows warmth, connection. We use soft words like that to show we care. Thalia looked at him, then with those wide violet eyes filled suddenly with an unfamiliar intensity. It took Jake breath away momentarily, until she spoke again in a voice barely above whisper, but holding so much thought behind each word. Even to strangers? Her query came out tentatively, almost as if afraid of what the answer might imply. Even though they were friends, no, just not that kind yet. Jake nodded slowly with understanding, seeing where her line of questioning was leading despite wanting to steer clear just then. Especially, he said softly but firmly, instead, knowing how much this concept could mean for someone whose culture took such declarations very seriously, indeed once given them. Everyone deserves a little kindness. Silence fell between them after that, as if both absorbing weight and meaning behind those simple words show much they meant, not just in context of their unusual situation, but universal appeal. She was quiet now, head bowed slightly, under contemplation, until finally looking up again at him with resolve shining through despite any lingering doubts she might have felt. Your people are very beautiful inside, Thalia, he said softly, then, as if to reassure both herself and Jake that there was indeed common ground here worth exploring further. Jake looked back into those violet depths, feeling more hopeful now than ever before despite confusion earlier. They were finding ways through together by respecting each other enough to listen deeply. So he reached out hesitantly at first, but then firmly taking her hand in his own with a sense of promise and support, intertwining fingers gently, as if sealing this newfound connection into place. Thanks, she murmured softly. After that brief touch made everything feel clearer somehow between them, even without explicit words needing to be said anymore. Then Thalia laid her head down on Jake's shoulder naturally, seeking comfort from someone who understood now beyond initial shock how deeply significant those few simple exchanged terms had been for both of them. Neither moved again for a long time after that, just sat there together under artificial sunset sky above Station Park, sharing silence and closeness instead, each aware that what started as misunderstanding could become something far greater given chance at mutual respect, care, and willingness to bridge differences rather than let them stand in way moving forward. A&D Chapter 5 Her quarters dinner. Thalia stood by her kitchen console, selecting ingredients for a traditional Vexari meal she was preparing for Jake. Her quarters were far more spacious than his hospital room, filled with soft blue lights and metallic accents that made everything gleam softly in the dim lighting. The scent of exotic spices wafted through the air as Thalie worked meticulously to prepare her favorite dishes. "Jake," she called out over her shoulder without turning around, "if you want to help, grab a towel first." She knew he was still recovering and wouldn't be able to handle much physical labor yet. He had already made it clear that despite his injuries, he wanted to contribute in some way if possible. In the doorway, Jake adjusted his bandages one more time before stepping inside with a wry smile on his face. "Just thinking about your cooking," he joked as he entered her quarters. "I didn't want you doing all this work alone." He took the towel from beside the door and headed over to help, despite knowing it might be clumsy at best. As she handed him various ingredients, small fish-like creatures, vibrant green vegetables, a couple of unfamiliar fruits, started chopping with exaggerated care. "This better taste good, nurse," he teased as his blade slipped slightly on one vegetable slice, leaving behind an uneven edge. Thalie laughed softly, her violet eyes sparkling despite the concern she felt watching him work near sharp objects and fragile ingredients so carefully packed away in their containers. "I promise it will be worth your efforts," she said reassuringly before leaning over to correct his knife grip gently without being too intrusive. "Remember, Vexari cuisine is delicate, but also heart. It needs finesse." He tried again with a grin and an exaggerated nod of thanks for her guidance. "Ah, the delicate dance of cooking," Jake joked as he mimicked some intricate movements that only made their food preparation more chaotic rather than precise. "Jake Morrison," she chuckled warmly despite herself at his antics, her patience wearing thin, but amusement winning out in equal measure. They both laughed together then when one particularly squishy fish-like creature flopped unexpectedly across the counter between them. Dinner was a joyous mess of laughter and half-hearted efforts to keep things neat as they worked side by side on Thalie's kitchen console, each mistake resulting not just in food, but also in light-hearted fun. As the dish prepared finally began emitting rich scents that filled her quarters with promise of warmth and comfort, she took a moment to appreciate their shared effort. "I think we're about done," Jake said breathlessly, as they stepped back from the console together once all was ready for serving. He wiped his brow self-consciously before glancing at Thalie, who was already setting out plates in anticipation of the evening's culmination. Thalie nodded appreciatively toward him, her expression softening with genuine gratitude, even if it wasn't always easy to read on Vexari faces, which typically remained stoic no matter what emotions ran underneath. She began laying silver patterns that marked important family occasions across their dinner were a clear indication of how special this meal felt for both of them. They ate slowly, savoring the flavors and textures of her native dishes. Jake tried his best to describe what each taste reminded him of in a way she could understand, while Thalie mirrored back explanations about why certain recipes held such significance culturally. The conversation flowed naturally between jokes and heartfelt exchanges that had been building up since their unexpected meeting. After dinner was cleared, they moved into the living area, where a small fire burned quietly but warmly in one corner, illuminating everything around them with soft light. Sitting down on her couch together, Thalie beside Jake, who rested his arm casually across its back, they turned to each other now that laughter and playful banter had given way to something deeper. "Jake," Thalie began softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled suddenly with an intensity that made him sit up straighter, immediately listening closely. No one has ever called me such things before." Her words were carefully chosen, yet held profound meaning underlying them, deeply personal despite the casual nature of his initial slip-up. Jake's eyes widened slightly as he realized just how significant what had happened was in her culture. "You mean baby means more than I thought?" He felt a sudden rush of warmth and embarrassment, knowing inadvertently he might have said something far too serious without intending it at all. Thales nodded slowly with an unreadable expression that made Jake's heart rate spike nervously despite how much they had bonded so rapidly over shared experiences these past days. "It's not just terms," she explained, her voice still calm but carrying weight of significance behind every word now. "In my culture, such declarations are binding. They imply connection on a very deep level." Jake swallowed hard as he felt everything fall into place suddenly, even if it meant acknowledging how much more was at stake here beyond casual camaraderie or friendship alone. "I didn't mean to. You have to know, I wouldn't do anything you're not comfortable with," he reassured her quickly but sincerely. She looked him directly in the eyes then, and something flashed across those wide violet depths, suddenly making Jake's breath catch. Saw recognition of shared vulnerability there despite how they were different beings from separate worlds. "But you did," she said softly yet decisively, as if coming to some kind of internal conclusion that had been building within her all along beneath surface-level conversations between them. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine, unsure where this was going, but somehow knowing it mattered deeply whatever came next after their day together and shared dinner. "I know," he admitted quietly with sincerity in every fiber of him now as well, acknowledging how much he had meant to both Joke and Siri. Aside alike despite uncertainty hovering around them still. "And," Thalia's voice softened further then, almost shyly, even though it didn't fit her typically reserved demeanor, "it means so much because I've never felt like this before." She looked away briefly, as if gathering courage or simply searching for words that would convey what she needed to say properly in their complex situation. Jake reached out gently and turned her face back toward him, tracing a thumb softly along the curve of her cheekbone where blue skin met silver patterns. "You deserve someone who shows you soft words," he said earnestly, without hesitation, now about how much this meant for both of them, navigating through unfamiliar territory together, but determined to support each other moving forward. Thalia's eyes locked onto his, searching deeply, as if looking beyond surface into some essential truth there between them, despite uncertainties looming large yet somehow not enough and more to hold them back entirely. "Are you that someone?" she asked softly, after a long moment of You'll gaze holding more promise than either wanted or expected given how it all started. Jake felt every part of him answering in kind before he even consciously could. An affirmative without spoken words, needed simply from shared understanding and respect built up now between them through their unlikely friendship. "I'm trying to be," he said softly but firmly in response, as if committing himself entirely despite potential risks involved given everything they represented. Her lips curved upward, ever so slightly thin, a hint of a smile that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds after storm, both bright and comforting at once. Without further hesitation, she leaned into him, closing that final distance between them. Finally, her first kiss with anyone outside her own kind meant something extraordinarily profound now, despite all doubts lingering still. Jake returned the kiss tentatively but wholeheartedly, feeling every touch against his skin like a promise of things yet to come, while also honoring what had brought them here today together. For both humans and Vexari alike, such moments marked beginning anew with hope amidst uncertainty, but also assurance that sometimes warmth mattered most in cold universe, no matter distance between stars. Their kiss ended eventually, leaving both breathless and full-hearted rather than tentative anymore. A connection forged stronger despite initial shock or differences holding them back initially. Each step forward now felt like taking a leap together into uncharted waters, yet somehow worth every moment of confusion that had come before leading here at last. And Jake walked through the familiar hospital corridor, his steps steady and purposeful despite a lingering sense of nervousness knotting deep within him. The walls were painted in calming shades of blue and green, their surfaces gleaming under the soft glow of overhead lights. He passed by other patients sitting quietly or chatting softly with visitors, but Jake's eyes remained fixed straight ahead toward Thalie, his medical bay. "Jake!" a voice called out from behind him. Turning around, he saw Dr. Lin waving and walking quickly toward him. "How are you feeling today?" He smiled warmly at his friend and mentor. "Feeling better every day," Jake replied honestly with a nod. "Just heading back to see Thalie. One last time before I head off duty." Dr. Lin's expression softened, understanding the significance of this visit for both patient human and alien. "I'll let her know you're coming." Thalie stood by the window in the medical bay where Jake had first woken up weeks ago, gazing out at the distant stars through a viewport embedded into the wall. The room still smelled faintly antiseptic, but also carried an undercurrent of something warmer, something uniquely familiar to her now that she associated with Jake's presence. She heard footsteps approaching and turned around just as Jake stepped inside. "Hey," he said softly, his eyes immediately locking onto hers before moving down the length of her figure clothed in a simple white uniform that highlighted both her grace and strength. "Jake." Thalia's voice held an unspoken question mixed with anticipation, knowing today would mark something different from their usual visits back since he was fully healed. "You didn't have to come so soon after shift." He shook his head as if dismissing the thought entirely. "Needed some closure," Jake admitted honestly. Thalie had nodded slowly, understanding perfectly well what that meant for them both despite all uncertainties still lingering around them regarding cultural differences and distance between worlds. Moving closer, she reached out gently, touching one bandaged hand with her own blue-skinned fingers, no longer healing but rather carrying reminders of how close they had come to losing each other. Jake's heart skipped a beat under the tender touch, as if reminding him just why this moment mattered so much more than casual goodbyes. "I've been thinking," he began slowly, drawing in deep breaths before continuing with renewed resolve. "About us." Thalia's violet eyes widened slightly at his words, but held no fear, only curiosity and hope intertwined tightly together now. "And," he smiled softly, then reached into the pocket of his uniform jacket, pulling out a small velvet box, which he extended toward her hesitantly yet firmly, knowing what was inside could change everything forever once spoken aloud here in this room. Thalie, his fingers trembled slightly as she accepted it from him, lifting up its lid to reveal an intricate silver ring carved with patterns familiar enough for understanding their meaning even if words couldn't quite convey them all. Her breath caught audibly at the sight of such a symbol tied so intimately between humans and Vexari customs alike. "About this," Jake continued, his voice barely above whisper, but clear and intent now as he knelt down on one knee before her, eyes never leaving hers, even for briefest second during their shared moment. "The first Tim, he was an accident." He took a deep breath, then exhaled slowly, looking deeply into those violet depths again, so full of unspoken promises between them despite initial shock or reservations about bridging gaps, both physical and cultural. But this time, I mean it. Jake continued earnestly, reaching out toward her once more, now with intention behind every movement. "Be mine forever, Thalia, Evexner." Tears shimmered in the corners of Thalia's eyes as she nodded silently, but unmistakably, those silver droplets falling down her cheeks, speaking volumes without ever needing to be spoken aloud. Then and there between them, "Baby," he whispered softly, with a mix of love and reverence evident now after everything they had endured together, bringing them closer than any other pairing could have ever hoped amidst complexity's vast universe, held in check somehow for mere moments shared here on Earth. She smiled, her voice filled with gratitude when she finally answered back, "Yes." The room seemed to hold its breath as the word echoed softly between walls painted blue and green, yet holding something far more colorful inside now, thanks solely due efforts of two beings reaching across divides impossible until one day proven otherwise through genuine connection forged amidst challenges faced bravely together. Jake laughed then, standing up straight again, finally feeling weight lifting off shoulders that had carried so much uncertainty before. "You have no idea how long I've been planning this." He reached out to wipe away her tears, with gentle fingers tracing patterns down soft blue skin, as if marking something far more permanent than any metal band could ever convey on its own. "Thalia," it chuckled softly then, returning laughter in kind despite initial apprehensions they had both faced head on now, arriving victorious over all odds, given time and patience spent building bridge strong enough to carry them forward into uncharted territory together. "I believe I do." What started as a joke became the most meaningful word either had ever spoken. No longer just between friends, but partners bound deeply by love transcending worlds themselves. And though many questions would remain unanswered for now, both knew there was plenty time yet to explore answers found within embrace, rather than fears looming large initially when first crossing paths under such unusual circumstances. And